Welcome to Read by the Author, season 3.5, episode 6. This is going to be the finale of World After. I can fumble my pickup. And I am, of course, here again with my lovely co-author, Lindsey Pogue, who is above me on my screen, but she's beside me in the video, so I don't know where to put my hands.
Oh, I know, that's funny.
Okay, so we are diving back in with chapter 15, which means if this is your first episode, you need to go back to 5 episodes ago to the first episode of World After and start there. Yeah.
Major spoilers
and confusion. Major confusion.
Yeah.
So otherwise, welcome back and let's get into the story. 15, Del. I just have to say, because LP reformatted all the files, the Kindle and the paperbacks and everything when we released the Raven Queen. Way to start it off with a author's note. But there's these cute little icons at the beginning of each chapter, and I get really happy whenever I see them.
Yeah.
There's a big raven outline for Del, and then these cute little paws for Finn.
It's fun. A little something different for us.
Yeah, I loved it. 15, Del. I sensed Finn was going to pull his hand from mine a moment before he broke contact, and I just barely managed to snap us both out of Jake's mind. I turned to Finn, intending to lay into him for pulling such a dangerous stunt. He could have been lost in there, just like Jake, but the handle on the study door started to turn. The door swung open, revealing Mother, flanked by 2 knights. Thankfully, Gareth wasn't one of them. I really didn't want him caught up in this mess. Mother's eyes widened, and the 3 newcomers paused in the hallway beyond. They clearly hadn't sensed us, thanks to Finn, who was statue still. Beast stalked out of the hidden passage, prowling protectively closer to us. My stare locked with Mother's, and I pulled the dagger from the sheath in my right boot and held it flush against Jake's neck in front of me. A dribble of blood leaked from the cut made by the sharp blade, but he would heal. His body would always heal, even if his mind was broken. Mother raised her hand, signaling for her guards to stand down. Finn looked at me, his eyes burning a hole into the side of my face as Beast paced in front of us, a living, breathing wall of fangs and claws. It took everything in me to ignore Finn's stare. Rage mixed with fear, making my breaths come faster. I could only see one way out of this. Mother cared about one thing more than she cared about her own life. Her kingdom, her legacy. In a twisted way, that meant she cared about me most of all. I could use that against her. I placed my hand on Jake's head, my palm flat against his forehead, and handed my dagger to Finn without taking my eyes off Mother. If you come any closer, I said, if you even move, I will scramble his brain and you'll never get what you're looking for. Mother blanched. Del, please, you don't understand. I scoffed, and a bitter guttural laugh clawed up my throat. Oh, I understand plenty, Mother, I seethed. My gaze flicked to Finn. I'm going to be occupied for a minute, I told him. Can you hold them off? Finn's eyes narrowed slightly. What are you going to do? I looked at Jake, seated in front of us, his stare as empty as my respect for Mother. No, I shouldn't be smiling through that. It's not the right feeling. I'm going to wake him up, I said. And then we're going to get the hell out of here. Del, Mother said, her voice pleading. Please, daughter. Shut up, I hissed. Just shut up. You have lost every right you ever had of calling me that. I've been to Prison Island. I shook my head, my nostrils flaring. The things you've done? I spat on the floor to the side of Jake's chair. You disgust me. Mother flinched at the words. I glanced at Finn, then at the guards. If they move. He nodded, his answering grin. He nodded, and his answering grin sent chills down my spine. I flashed him a tight, closed-mouth smile before kneeling on the floor in front of Jake. I reached up, clasping the fingers of both hands around either side of his head, a cage of flesh and bone, and stared into his vacant eyes. Jake, I said, sending tendrils of myself into his mind, seeking out the part of him that was lucid, aware, lost. Jake, wake up, I ordered, the tendrils still searching. You have to wake up. And then I found him, in that final memory, the one that had been too much for Finn, too raw. I could hardly blame him. My cheeks were still wet with the tears born of Jake's complete and utter devastation. Zoe had been a clever one, her mind remaining sharp even as her body failed her. She had known Jake would need a purpose to keep on living, something to keep his soul alive, even as his ability kept his body going. I closed my eyes and bowed my head, fresh tears breaking free. I hated what I was about to do to Jake, what I had to do to save him. Promise me, Jake, I said, my chin trembling as I repeated Zoe's final words. I wrapped those tendrils of myself around him, a lifeline pulling Jake out of his darkest moment. They're all we have left, our legacy. My voice broke along with my heart. I cleared my throat and pulled harder on the tendrils connecting us. You have to keep them safe. As I said those last few words, I gave one final tug and opened my eyes. A tear had formed in the corner of Jake's eye. He took a shuddering breath, and then his chest was shaking. Suddenly a sob racked his whole body, and he slumped forward, falling against me, dislodging Sid and sending the raven flapping toward a new perch. I braced the toes of my boots against the rug and wrapped my arms around Jake, glaring at Mother over his shoulder as this strong, ancient man fell to pieces in my arms. You will let them leave, I told her, my voice harsh but ringing with command, and you will not hunt them or their people anymore. Mother stared at me for a long moment. Del. You will do what I say, Mother, I spat, cutting her off, or I will leave. I clenched my jaw, reining in the wild sorrow and anger raging through me until my voice was cold and even. I will leave, and I will never come back, and your dynasty, your legacy, will die here with you. Mother inhaled and exhaled, her head held high and her shoulders pushed back, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the desperation. She would do almost anything to keep me here, to protect her legacy. After a long, tense moment, she nodded. Tension eased from my body, but I didn't let it show. I tore my stare from Mother to focus on Jake, pushing him back gently so he was sitting up straight and I could see his face. His eyes were red-rimmed, but sobs no longer racked his body, and his breaths were even, if a little shaky. I slowly waved my hand back and forth in front of his face until I caught his attention, and his eyes focused on mine. My lips curved into a gentle smile, offering him what little comfort I could in such a terrible situation. Can you stand? I asked him. He nodded, groaning as Finn reached out to help him to his feet. When Jake was finally standing, he leaned heavily on Finn. I could only imagine what physical torments they had unleashed upon him, a man who could heal almost any wound, to get him to spill his secrets, torture, of a patron on Mother's orders. The knowledge made me physically ill. I stepped out in front of our ragtag party, and Sid launched from his perch on a bookshelf, soaring toward my shoulder. He landed and snapped his beak at Mother. She narrowed her eyes, watching him closely. Steps slow and even, I approached Mother, stopping in front of her and holding out my hand. There's one thing I need to know, I told her, our gazes locked together. Why do you do it? Why kidnap the healers? Why breed them? Why harvest them? I demanded. They're people, Mother. People. Mother licked her lips. No, I snapped, thrusting my outstretched hand even closer to her. Give me your hand so I know you're not feeding me more lies. Ever so slowly, Mother extended her hand and placed it in mine. I curled my fingers around hers, gripping them tightly. We're dying, Mother said, her voice little more than a whisper. Our people are dying. Too much class inbreeding has made us weak and sick, and the elixir is the only thing keeping this kingdom going. But beneath her words, I could see the ugly truth. Yes, many of our people were sick and would die without the elixir, but the affliction only affected the elite, those who prized class purity above all else. The vast majority of our people were just fine. I narrowed my eyes at her. You mean keeping the elite going, the pure. Without the elixir, all of your most powerful allies would die. I caught a flash of her fear. Fear not just for her people, but fear for herself. She had been taking the elixir, not because she was suffering from some degenerative disease, but to stay strong and healthy when the burdens of ruling a crumbling kingdom threatened to crush her. Her youthful appearance was suddenly impossible not to notice. Another older worry tickled. Silly worry. Another older worry trickled in from her mind to mine. She worried I was a carrier of the degenerative disease. She worried my children would need the elixir to survive, just as Kala, her firstborn, had needed it. Only Kala had discovered Mother's secret years before I was born, and she had refused to continue to take the healing elixir, and she had died as a result, her death disguised as an assassination. The elite keep us strong, Mother said, steel seeping into her voice. The elixir keeps us strong. I shook my head. How could she be so blind? No, it doesn't, I told her. It makes us weak, dependent. It turns us into monsters. I implored her with my eyes, pleading for her to understand. What would the people say if they knew what you did to babies born with the healing gift? What would they say if they knew you stole and imprisoned their children, that you bred them and bled them? What would they say, Mother? Mother's shoulders slumped further with each question, with each word. She hung her head, her cheeks damp with tears. It was for the greater good, she said, but the conviction had drained from her voice, leaving her sounding weak and uncertain. I know you believe that, I said, my voice softening. You really do. I shook my head, fixing a hard stare on her. But you're wrong. I was quiet for a moment, staring into her eyes, hating her for what she had done to our people. We're leaving, I told her. I'm going with them, but I'll come back. Someone has to fix the mess you've made. I squeezed Mother's hand tighter, digging deep for any hint of deception within her. Will you try to stop us? Mother didn't even hesitate. She shook her head, and I could feel her submission through our joined hands. And I also felt it the moment some of the steel returned to her backbone. No, she said. I won't try to stop you. Her eyes met mine. But if you don't return, Delphinia. I laughed under my breath, once again disgusted by the woman who had brought me into this world. If I didn't return, she would hunt down and slaughter every last one of Jake's people as punishment for my betrayal. You'll never change, will you? I said, more a statement than a question. Mother held her head high, her stare hard. How can I change if you abandon me? I held her stare, ensuring she had plenty of time to sense my intent. I will return, I vowed, but not for you. I released her hand and backed up a step. I'll return for our people. Now, get out of our way. Without another word, Mother moved off to the side and motioned for the two guards to do the same. Beast passed through the doorway first, followed by Finn, supporting Jake. I remained behind, holding Mother's stare for a moment longer, and then I, too, left, and I didn't look back.
16, Finn. Standing at the bow of the sailboat as it soared through the water, I let the bay breeze whipping over my face divest me of the remaining mind fog that Del's cerebral fingers had left behind, all of Jake's pain and agony, and all the memories I'd felt as if they were my own. I couldn't unsee them. I couldn't unfeel them either. I idly stroked Beast's head as he sat at my side, something I had been doing since we'd boarded the vessel Del had commandeered to take us home. She'd seemed as urgent to leave the city as the rest of us, and even if our village in the forest was only miles across the bay, it felt like we were traveling to an entirely different world, and I longed to be back in the comfort of the familiar, to see my sister, who was probably out of her mind with worry. I glanced beyond the captain at Jake, sitting on the deck with his arms draped over his knees and his head resting against the wood-slatted hull. He looked better than when we'd found him in the Queen's study, but not great. His neck wound was gone, but I wasn't sure his mind would ever be the same again. Sleep. Beast's thoughts of Jake filled my mind, along with his concern. Yes, Jake needed rest in order to regenerate properly, but I feared it would take a lot more than a good night of sleep to cure him this time. I'd felt his mind, and I knew how broken he was. He'd spent years pushing the past away, and now it felt as if all of it had happened only yesterday. For the first time in my life, I realized that Jake's ability was a lifelong curse, and I pitied him. It didn't matter how far he ran, or for how many years he stayed hidden away and out of reach. Jake would never be free, not from his memories or his past, and not from the Queen's reach, or the reach of anyone else like her. The Queen had let us go for now, but unlike Del, I wasn't convinced it was for good. I'd seen the desperation in the Queen's eyes, the absolute need to appease Del, her sole heir, and people promised impossible things when they were desperate. Sidestepping the captain, Del walked toward me, her raven black curls escaping from the knot on top of her head and whipped around her face, thwarting Sid as he gripped her shoulder against the breeze to stay upright. Del was strong, and while I admired her for how she had stood up to her mother, the ruler of the Corvo kingdom, I didn't envy her for having to go back. In fact, my chest tightened at the thought. Del stepped up beside me, shifting her worried gaze from Jake to me. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper against the wind. Sid ruffled his feathers and settled back into place on her shoulder. "I take Jake home and let him sleep it off for a few days, and I pray my sister can help him in some way, because without Jake to guide us, I have no idea what happens to our people next." There was no going back to the way things used to be. I knew too much now, felt far too much, and I was determined not to live complacently like before. And after seeing with my own two eyes what my people would be up against if the Queen ever did come for us, we had preparations to make. Del tucked a wayward wisp of hair behind her ear and looked at me, confused. "Your sister? What can she do to fix Jake?" I dipped my chin. "Autumn's a healer. Well, not in the way you think of them." I explained and pointed to my head. "She deals in herbs, but she has a way of soothing the mind." I thought about Chris and Harper from Jake's memory and wondered how similar to them we still were. She can fix people sometimes if they open their minds to her, put them at ease a bit. After today, I worried Jake would be reticent to open his mind to anyone ever again. I suddenly wondered if that was why my sister and Jake had grown close. When he'd returned years ago, battered and broken from one of his crusades, they'd connected in a way I'd never understood. Had Autumn helped him ease into this new life, and that was why they had a curious connection? The love he and my sister shared wasn't the smoldering stuff Claire used to read about in her romance novels. How could it ever be after knowing what life had once been for Jake, Zoe, and their family? But my sister's connection to him was there nonetheless, something strong and unspoken that I'd never comprehended before. Is that why she was so patient with him? Because she understood him like the rest of us never had? My heart ached as I thought of Claire and the guys. It had only been a couple of days since my best friend's deaths, and now that I was returning home, I felt their absences keenly. They wouldn't be there to greet me when I returned to the village. We would never sit around the campfire again, Dallas putting on his practiced barred voice to read the most inappropriate parts of Claire's favorite love stories. author's note, I just have to say, I put that in there because there's actually that actually has happened. It used to happen when we used to go camping. When a Genesis friends would read my some of my vampire romance stuff out loud around the campfire. That's really fun.
Oh my God, that's great.
I know. Sorry. Anyway, I would never see her cheeks bloom as red as they had on those nights we teased her, and I would never hear my friends laughing again, ever. Reality would be so altered from when I'd left. The entire village would still be in mourning, and I would have to live with the horrors I'd seen in the city. Not to mention, I was returning with Delphinia, the princess of evil in my people's eyes. But what stung the most was that Del wouldn't stay forever, and when she left, I would have to mourn the loss of another friend. What's wrong? She asked, studying me. Her expression was pinched with concern. When she stopped scratching Beast behind the ears, he peered up at her, expectant. Is it your head? Her eyes were wide with worry. Del rested her hand on my arm and pulled me to face her fully. I told you not to let go in the study. I've never done anything like that before. I could have. I'm fine, I told her, trying not to smile at how cute she was when she was concerned, even if she was still ornery. It's just the last few days have been a lot, you know. What the Rangers did to my friends, what you and I saw in the prison, and with Jake, all of it. How do we come back from all of that? Del blinked, and a few seconds passed before she pursed her lips and slowly shook her head. I don't know, she admitted. And her words vanished with the wind. I really don't know. We stood in silence again, staring out at the wooded ridgeline as the horizon drew closer. My entire world had been turned upside down in the span of a few days, and I hated to think what the next 24 hours would bring. More chaos and confusion, more heartache. I looked at Del, wondering what thoughts churned behind her dark eyes. Why did you decide to come back with us? I asked. It wasn't that I didn't want her to, but for some reason, her answer mattered to me, probably more than it should. Del's gaze shifted from me to the cliffs and jetting redwoods we sailed toward. Curiosity, she admitted. And your people deserve an apology for what's happened, even if I know it fixes nothing. Suddenly, her brow furrowed, and her gaze shot to mine, less certain. Do you think that's a bad idea? Del glanced at Jake behind us, as if she were tallying all the ways and reasons this could go terribly wrong. I shrugged. I wish I could tell her that everyone would warm to her eventually, despite her name and lineage, especially once they knew her the way that I did. But I had a feeling Del wouldn't be sticking around long enough for that. My heart sank with an unexpected heaviness. You didn't mention when you'd be returning to the city, I realized aloud. Del chewed on her bottom lip, her eyes thoughtfully fixed on mine. I'm not sure, she finally admitted. I couldn't tell if there was an underlining question in her answer, or if it was a simple fact. There's no rush, you know. You could stay a while. I couldn't help the smirk that tugged at the corner of my mouth. It wouldn't hurt your mother to stew for a bit. Del rolled her eyes, more exasperated and exhausted than anything, but she smiled just a little. I wish it was that easy. Do you? The words fell from my lips, more earnest than I'd expected. What did Del want? Now that she knew what the Queen was capable of and about our lives out here, what was it that she longed for? A gilded cage or freedom with me? Do I what? Do you wish it was that easy? I urged, feeling a sudden flourish of nerves. Do you want to stay? For some reason, I couldn't bring myself to ask her outright, but by Del's response, I didn't have to. Her cheeks blushed, and her eyebrows rose ever so slightly. But as Del's brow furrowed and her silence hung between us, I realized how dumb my question had been. Actually, I said, forcing another smirk, scratch that. I rested my elbows on the railing. It's too boring out here, and I know how much you like your adventures. Del frowned. Finn, Your Highness, the captain called against the wind. Del's posture instantly straightened, and her princess face slipped into place as we both turned to him. We're about a mile out, he called. Where would you like me to drop anchor? Del's eyes flashed to mine, and I couldn't tell if she was regretful or relieved for the interruption. I think we both know you're the seafarer of the two of us. With an exaggerated gesture toward the captain, Del flashed me a crooked grin. If you'd be so kind as to direct him. As you wish, princess.
17. Del. I lowered the oar into the water and heaved in time with Finn, over and over again. We rowed the small boat ever closer to shore, the sailboat silhouetted behind us by the setting sun and gleaming water. Jake sat on the bench near the stern of the rowboat, his stare distant, though thankfully not vacant like before. He was lost in thought, but not lost within his own mind. Beast lay sprawled out between Jake's feet and ours, and Sid soared overhead, coasting on the bay breeze. Just a few more, Finn grunted as we rowed. All right, raise your oar, he said, pulling his into the boat and twisting around on the bench we shared. He stood carefully and stepped over the bench to stand crouched in the bow. I turned to watch as we glided into shore. The sandy beach stretched out in either direction, and a steep cliffside jutted out of the sand farther in. A waterfall poured over the top of the cliff, the fresh water streaming down to the beach and into the sea. I stared in wonder. I had never seen anything like this before. I had barely ever left the city walls, and I almost couldn't believe my eyes. This place was so foreign, so wild, so other. I had been so certain about coming here, but now that we were actually here, nerves twisted my stomach into knots. These people would never accept me. I had seen in Finn's mind all Mother had put them through, all the suffering at the hands of her rangers, all the death and sorrow. It had taken a lot for Finn to see past his hatred of the kingdom and to really see me. I had earned his trust through action. I had proven myself to him. But how could I do the same with the rest of his people? All I had now were words, and I feared words would do little to wear down their well-honed animosity. Finn leapt onto the sandy beach just as the hull scraped the bottom. He immediately turned to grip the bow of the boat with both hands, waiting for Beast to follow him before pulling the boat further ashore. Jake, I murmured. When he looked at me, I nodded toward the beach. Ready to go? Jake blinked, looking around like he was just realizing where we were. Home, or as close as anything would ever be to him without her. He stood and took slow, unsteady footsteps toward the bow. Finn helped him out of the boat and onto the shore, and once Finn released his hand, Jake wandered closer to the falls and sat on a dry patch of rock. The centuries of life seemed to weigh down heavier on the ancient healer now, weakening him from within. I tossed Finn the line, then gripped his offered hand and hopped out onto the beach. So I've been thinking, could you maybe not tell your people who I am? I asked, avoiding eye contact as we hauled the empty boat higher up on the shore, beyond the reach of the changing tide. At least not until after I'm gone. I raised my eyes to meet Finn's. His gaze was searching, and for a long moment he didn't say anything. This is good enough, he muttered as he tied the rope around a large oblong stone angled toward the waterfall. When Finn was finished, he straightened and stared out at the sea, pondering my request. And when will you be gone? I'll leave in the morning, I told him. First thing. I knew he wanted me to stay longer. I had sensed it during the trip here. It wasn't that I didn't want to stay for a while, but to do so would put Finn and Jake at risk. It would endanger all of their people, and I just couldn't do it. The longer I'm gone, I told him, the more likely it is that Mother will decide I've fled and send the might of the kingdom after you. If you thought it was bad before, I shook my head, willing him to understand. Finn blew out a breath, his attention drifting to Jake, still perched on that rock, watching the sun sink into the sea. Yeah, Finn said, sure. Your secret's safe with me. He laughed under his breath, though there was no humor in the sound. And I don't think he'll be telling anyone much of anything anytime soon. I nodded, placing a hand on Finn's arm. He will be fine, eventually, I assured him. Or whatever passes for fine for him. Finn grunted, then heaved a sigh. I really hope you're right. I know it's selfish to want to keep him here. And I knew Finn didn't mean keep him here as in this place, but here as in alive. But we still need him. I still need him. One day, I said, you'll have to let him go. Finn stared at the man who was like a father to him. But not yet, he said, looking at me, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I shook my head, a sad smile curving my lips. No, not yet. We headed toward the falls and retrieved Jake, and soon enough we were climbing up a path cut into the face of the cliff in such a way that it was almost completely hidden from the shore. Beast took the lead, followed by Finn and Jake, with me bringing up the rear. Sid was hunting, and Finn had let him know to return to the sailboat rather than join us ashore, for the sake of concealing my identity. The trail atop the cliff was narrow and winding, and the forest surrounding us was surprisingly dense, dimming the already fading light. I wondered if someone in the village had some control over the foliage, allowing these people to encourage the forest to conceal them better. I had never met anyone with that talent. But I had heard rumors. Some rumors were just that, but some were based on truth. We had just passed a fork in the trail, and the way ahead broadened when a slight blonde woman rounded a curve in the trail ahead. Her expression was wild and hopeful, and her long curls streamed behind her as she ran toward us, making her appear like an ethereal fairy creature in the twilight forest. "You're back!" she exclaimed breathlessly, slowing to a walk. "Oh, thank God! I thought I would never see you again." She stopped in front of Finn and Jake, and as she scanned the latter, her keen stare seemed to note each and every one of his partially healed injuries. Her eyes lingered on his face, on his dazed stare, before shifting to Finn. "But you came back," she said. "And you found him. And none too soon from the looks of it." Her chin trembled. "I was so scared, little brother." She threw her arms around Finn, though he was anything but little compared to her, squeezing her eyes shut and holding him tight. I was overcome by awkwardness. This was a private moment, and I didn't belong here. I took a step backward, then another, second-guessing my decision to come. "I thought I made a mistake telling you to go after him," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought you were dead, and—" Hey, Finn said, rubbing her back as she sobbed silently against his shoulder. "It's all right, Autumn. I'm all right." Autumn took a deep, shaky breath and pulled away from her brother, wiping away her tears with quick swipes of her fingers. "So what happened?" she said, sniffling. "I want to hear everything." Her focus shifted past Finn, finally landing on me, and her expression clouded with uncertainty. "And who is this?" Finn turned partway, holding his arm out to me. "This is Del," he said, taking a step my way. "She helped me get Jake out of there. I couldn't have done it without her." Finn laughed and shook his head. "I owe her my life. Mine and Jake's both." Atum's eyebrows rose, and she regarded me with renewed interest.
I just have to laugh because I know what you have been reading.
Yeah.
Atum, you're like, Atum's eyebrows rose.
Did I say that?
Yes. No, it's fine. It just cracks me up because I know it's what you were reading all day.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I'll fix it.
Now I'm not working about it, but I just had to point it out.
I can't believe I did that. That's so funny. Autumn's eyebrows rose, and she regarded me with renewed interest. "Well then," she said, a warm smile transforming her face. "I owe you my gratitude. You are welcome in our village and our home for as long as you would like to stay." Her focus flitted from me to Finn and back, like she was wondering if there was more between us. I blushed, despite not knowing why. "Just for the night," I told her, "and then I'll be out of your hair." Autumn's smile wavered. I have to think about it.
I know. Trust me. You know how my brain works.
Yeah.
I totally get it.
"Well, if you change your mind, the offer still stands." She nodded to me, then moved closer to Jake, pulling his arm over her shoulders and curling hers around his waist, more for comfort than support. "Come on, big guy," she murmured. "Let's get you inside and cleaned up." She headed back the way she had come, and Finn, Beast, and I followed. I almost missed the first few cabins. They blended in so well with the forest, almost looking like they had grown there rather than been built. But within a matter of minutes, we were in the heart of their village, and the cabins, as remarkable as they were, faded into the background as the people captured my attention. Some moved about, others sat on porches or within shelters, working on what I assumed were daily tasks. A young girl spread seed to chickens inside a pen while a little boy whittled a long stick on a stool beside her. An old woman hummed to herself as she molded clay in her hand, a bowl beginning to form. A man hung meat in a hut, doing a double take as he watched us pass. Regardless of what the villagers were doing, they exuded a sense of purpose, of peace and contentment. I came here looking for proof that there really was another way, a better way to live, to thrive. And yet I found myself scanning the people's faces for hints of dissatisfaction or even fear, for the things I was so used to seeing on the faces of those living in Corvo City. But everyone here seemed at ease, content with their existence in a way that was entirely foreign to me. I hadn't known people could live so peacefully. I could practically feel their calm seeping into me. All the struggles in Corvo City seemed centered around the class system and our yearning for purity. But now I could see that the thing that formed the very basis of our society was a construct, if not created by those in charge, like Mother, at least used by them to their advantage. We were destroying ourselves in our attempt to achieve something that didn't matter, something that wasn't real. Purity. We entered a clearing that seemed like a wooded town square. Some people were already gathered there, while others trickled in from various paths. Autumn and Jake followed one of those paths, disappearing into a cozy-looking cabin. Finn's people greeted him, congratulating him on his victorious return, relieved he had come back to them in one piece. A few young women eyed me warily, mistrust written all over their faces, not because they suspected who I was, but because they worried about what I was to Finn. Everyone else, however, greeted me warmly, if a little shocked to have a visitor. A bonfire was built, and food and ale were brought out as people gathered to hear Finn regale his daring journey. I moved off to the side, sitting on an upturned stump that had been set near the fire, listening as he recounted our adventures, thankfully glossing over the details that would have revealed my true identity. And I assumed it was also watered down to spare them some of the more horrible truths, at least for now. He offered them versions of the truth and recounted the types of merchants he saw, the shops and smells of Corvo City, in a way that held the villagers' attention. He made them cringe and laugh, and others cheered to his safe return, over and over until they forgot the horrific reason he had left to begin with. By the time he finished, I was staring into the dancing flames. It seemed almost impossible, so much had happened in so little time. In just a matter of days, everything had changed. "What's on your mind?" Finn asked as he scooted a stump closer to my perch and sat, his shoulder brushing mine. He handed me a cup of wine and tapped his own cup against mine before taking a swig. I sipped the wine and eyed him. "You know, I haven't heard the whispers since we left the castle," I said. I had told him all about the whispers on the trip over. He knew as much as I did now, which wasn't really saying much. They had been born of a resonance centered around Mother and Zoe's book, and like voices from the distant past, the whispers had guided me toward a specific end. "I think this is what they wanted, for me to help you guys, then to come here and see this, to see how much better we could be." "You could stay," Finn said, not for the first time. "Have you considered that's what they want? That you don't have to go back there and be married off to the highest bidder?" I was surprised by his intensity as he spoke. "We can hide you from her along with the rest of us, just like we've always done." I stared into the flames and let myself imagine, just for a moment, what life might be like for me here. What a life with Finn might be like. I leaned my head on his shoulder and smiled to myself. It was a pretty fantasy, an impossible one, but pretty nonetheless. Nobody ever needs to know who you really are, Finn added, his arm curling around my shoulders. Don't you deserve the chance to have a life of your own? To choose your own path? But he couldn't see that that was exactly what I was doing. It might not have been the path I wanted, but it was the path that needed me most. I can't, I told him in a dreamy tone. I had already had several generous cups of wine, and it was starting to show. You know I can't. I sighed, then yawned and closed my eyes. I know, he said softly, but it was worth another try. Finn's body was warm and protective beside me, and my mind began to float away. I woke to the sensation of something wet soaking through my pant leg over my knee. I had drifted off and spilled my wine. All right, Finn said. Let's get you inside. It's been a long couple of days. Even princesses have to rest at some point. Shh. I straightened and looked around, making sure nobody could have overheard. Finn smirked and held a hand out to me as he stood. Come on, tough stuff. I took his hand and let him pull me up to my feet. He led me out of the clearing and along a winding trail uphill. I was about to ask him if we were lost when a cabin came into view, and I noticed Beast lounging on the porch in a patch of moonlight. Hello, sweet beastie, I cooed, smiling down at him as he flicked his tail and yawned in answer. You and me both, I said through a yawn of my own. Finn opened the door to the cabin and led me inside. The soft scent of earth and leather hit my nose. The interior was small and bathed in shadows and streams of moonlight, and in no time Finn had me settled on a couch in the main room with a couple of pillows propping up my head and a handmade quilt tucked around me. Finn brushed a loose curl out of my face, gently tucking it behind my ear. Get some rest, Del, he whispered, turning away from the couch. I reached for his hand and gave it a squeeze. Thanks, Finn. He turned back to me, his brow furrowed. For what? I smiled sleepily. For everything. With a flush of his cheeks, he ducked his head and rubbed the back of his neck. Then, releasing my hand, he retreated into his bedroom, leaving the door cracked open an inch or two. It was just enough for me to watch him tug his shirt over his head in the dim light of a lantern before he stepped out of sight. My heart was suddenly pounding in my chest, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the crack in the door. This was it, what Hills had been talking about. This was my chance to have something just for me, my chance to create a memory that I could hold on to through all the hard times that lie ahead, my chance to experience the life I could have had I been anyone else, if only for a night. My chance to have Finn. I sat up, then stood and padded to the bedroom door. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and Finn straightened from the wash basin in the corner, water dripping down his face to his bare chest. His physique was lean but strong, his muscles well-defined beneath the smattering of tawny chest hair. His eyes met mine, surprise giving way to understanding, to desire. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the bedroom and shut the door.
Finn, 1 month later. My people need me, Finn. You know that. Just like you said your people need you. Del's brown eyes were wide, full of hope and determination. As much as I admired her for it, I greedily wished she wasn't so noble. Think of all we can change. I snorted. I keep my people safe and free, and you change a kingdom? Seems easy enough. She rolled her eyes and pushed my shoulder playfully. I'm serious, Finn. I grabbed Del's hand, holding it against my chest, trying to imagine a future in which our paths would cross again and under much more pleasant circumstances. The future Del saw, the one we both wanted to work toward, even if it felt like we'd been dealt the shittiest hand in the process. I know you are, princess. I tucked a dark ringlet behind her ear. Now that you know what your mother's been grooming you for, what happens this weekend at the bicentennial celebration? She looked at me askance. You mean, will I still announce an engagement? Clenching my jaw, I nodded reluctantly. Dell studied me thoughtfully, and I began to squirm under her gaze. Everything is different now, she finally said. Mother knows that. I don't know exactly what my future looks like, other than that I'm going to release the healers from the prison, but I know there's too much I still don't understand before I make any hasty decisions. Her gaze scoured my face, and the longer we stared at one another, drinking each other in, the more the blush on her cheeks deepened. I'd never met anyone like her, nor was I likely to ever again. Finally, she licked her lips. I should go. I know, I said, hoping her answer meant she wasn't jumping into an engagement, at least. Heaving out a breath, I took a step away. Your ship awaits, my lady. I gestured toward the rowboat that would take her to the sailboat anchored offshore. Taking Dell's hand, I helped her climb into the rowboat. The waters are choppy today, tough stuff, so be careful and show those oars who's boss. I will, she said with a chuckle, and she flashed me a smile over her shoulder. Before she let go, she squeezed my hand in hers. Goodbye, Finn. I dipped my chin in answer, not wanting to repeat the words for fear they would be true, and I pushed the rowboat into the sea. Safe travels, princess. Our eyes met one last time as Dell took the oars in hand. It seemed like a cruel joke that the first time I'd met her, we'd been rowing towards something together, and now she was rowing away from me, for now. Hey, princess, I called, as the boat sloshed farther out to sea. Dell cupped her hand over her eyes to see me in the bright morning light. This isn't goodbye, you know. You haven't gotten rid of me that easily. The corner of her mouth quirked with a barely there smile. Don't I know it? She retorted. I'd stood on that shore until the sailboat's tall mast was no more than a pinprick on the horizon, and our farewells had filled my mind every moment since. I shoved my bedroll into my pack with the rest of my things for the trek north, and I donned my long sleeves for the gusty weather along the coast. Dell was right about us. Nothing was the same now. We had futures to embrace that would change the fate of both of our people, and it was only possible if we did it together, just not the way we necessarily wanted. After rescuing Jake from the Queen and learning the awful truths about what was happening in her kingdom, and especially after seeing the life Jake had lived over the centuries, I knew it was up to Dell and me to change things. Glancing around my humble abode, I wondered how many weeks would pass before Jake and I returned. He had so much still to show me about his life, our history, and our people, about the world, years of communities and hideouts, and a better understanding of our lineage if I was going to lead and protect our people when he was gone again. Because Jake was a ghost, and he would leave us again. Shrugging into my pack, I glanced around the cabin one last time, opened my front door, and stepped out onto the porch where Beast lounged in a splash of sunlight. He took the side of me in and groaned, lying his head back down in defiance. What? Are you getting old on me or something? I said, shaking my head. You've had a whole month to relax. His tail whipped caustically and his eyes flitted closed as if he couldn't hear me. I saw a flit of black feathers from the corner of my eye as I stepped off the porch. Squinting, I strained to see a very familiar, very cantankerous looking raven. My heartbeat thumped double time and I smiled. Well, look what the cat dragged in, I said, as Sid landed on a low-hanging redwood bough. I opened my mind to Sid's and saw a flutter of images of the sea and the city and of Dell tying a note to his leg. A message? I couldn't suppress my growing grin or worrying pulse. Ooh, that's a hard one. Spreading his wings, Sid sailed closer, landing on the porch step behind me. God, I'm struggling. Beast eyed the raven closely, flicking his tail farther out of Sid's reach, as if the cougar was worried he might get a love peck. Sid blinked at him, and I bent down to untie the message from his leg. I swallowed thickly as I unrolled it and began to read. I wanted you to be the first to know All healers have been released and returned to their families, and this is only the beginning. D. P.S. Summer Solstice Festival in June. I might know someone who can sneak you in. Smiley face. I stared at the scroll, my thoughts torn between imagining the scowl on the queen's face when she had learned Del was going to free her precious captives, and wondering if 2 months was enough time for Jake and me to return from our trip before the festival. As I read Del's note again, I wondered how exactly the queen had explained her atrocities to the people, but then I reminded myself all that mattered was that Del had kept her word, and the future of Corvo City would be a better one because of her. The summer solstice. With a grin, I held up the slip of paper. A personal invite by Her Royal Highness, eh, Sid? I said, glancing down at the raven. How could I refuse? Don't go yet. Dropping my pack on the dirt with a thud, I leapt past Sid and Beast on the porch and hurried back into the cabin. There were 100 things I wanted to say to Del, but I held on to them for the festival when our paths would cross again. Instead, I wrote, I never doubted you for a minute, tough stuff. F. P.S. As you wish, princess. Then, Jake's voice echoed from outside. Rolling up the paper, I hurried out the front door again and latched it behind me. We're burning daylight, kid, Jake called from down the dirt walkway. He leaned against the giant redwood, his arms crossed over his chest and his pack resting at his feet. Almost ready, I told him, and tied my response to the raven's leg. Thanks, Sid. The bird tilted his head, blinked at me with a less than enthusiastic caw, then sprung into the air, flapping his onyx wings until he disappeared through the trees. Beast groaned in relief and laid his head down again, grateful the bird was gone so he could continue his morning nap. Secret messages? Jake mused, as I lugged my pack back onto my back. Uh-oh. I couldn't contain a smirk as I headed toward him. Something like that. He lifted a skeptical eyebrow. Do I even want to know? Nope, I said easily, which earned me a deep chuckle. With a sidelong look, I fell into step beside Jake. Come on, lazy bones, I called to Beast as he reluctantly climbed to his feet. It's time for another adventure. The end.
The end. To be continued. So we're not reading the next book on here, but I did want people to know that the next book, The Raven Queen, is currently available, so you can continue the story. It picks up 10 years later, and as I'm sure you can imagine, not everything goes smoothly after this. It's definitely a really great story in terms of how Finn and Del find their way back to each other.
And I have to say, I'm really proud of us for, as we were reading that, I was noticing all the things that we set up the next book for. And we wrote them a couple years apart. So we did a really good job of continuing that. Yeah. So I think we should pat ourselves on the back for that. Yeah.
I know. The little things we didn't even realize that we had seeded earlier. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's always exciting to find in books.
Yeah.
That you wrote yourself.
Yeah. You're like, oh, I'm more clever than I thought I was.
Look at that. I want to say a big thank you to Lindsey for coming and joining us on the show and reading Finn's chapters. We will be going into season 4 next, which is just me again. I'm going to be continuing with the ECHO trilogy. And it will be Dissonance, which is the novella that takes place between book 2, Time Anomaly, and book 3, Ricochet Through Time. There is always a chance that I will take a week off, so the first episode of that may not come out 1 week from this. We'll see how I'm feeling. I just had a huge out loud reading. I had a big week. It was a lot of work, a full weekend of working. So I may just decide to take a break next weekend. So we'll see. But either next weekend or the one after that, I'll be back to start Dissonance ECHO Trilogy number 2.5. So until then, happy reading, everybody.
Bye.